Hello and welcome to Book of the Mouse Club, episode 43, Thursday, June 25th, 2020.
Morning, monsieur.
Where are you off to?
The bookshop. I just finished the most wonderful story about a beanstalk and an ogre and
That's nice. Marie! The baguettes! Hurry up!
I'm sorry, but how can one possibly pay attention to a book with no pictures in it?
My dear child, there are a great many good books in this world without pictures.
I almost bounced clear out of the book. Some bouncing, huh?
Come home or make myself known.
J. Thaddeus Turtle, Esquire. Have you never met him? You will find his story in this delightful little book, The Wind and the Willows.
I've come to return the book I borrowed.
Finished already?
Oh, I couldn't put it down. Have you got anything new?
Ahoy, listeners! Welcome back to another episode. I'm your host, Courtney, and I am joined, as always, by me hearty co-host, Emily.
Yo ho ho, Courtney. It is great to be back and to start our summer reading.
Yes, today we are lucky to have another member join our crew as a guest reader. In the World of Disney podcast, Dan Heaton's Tomorrow Society is the intellectual corner where great minds come together to share their love of Disney. In this melting pot of minds, you'll find authors, bloggers, former Imagineers, and more. We're excited to have him on our show today. Welcome, Dan.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I don't know. Intellectual. I don't know if I can live up to that, but I appreciate the intro. I'm excited to be here.
Dan, we were so excited that we had the pleasure to be on episode 72 of your show last year to discuss our general Disney fandom. Courtney and I are well acquainted with your podcast, but could you introduce yourself to our listeners and tell them about the Tomorrow Society podcast and your blog?
Sure. Yeah. So I started the Tomorrow Society as a blog in 2015 and started doing a few interviews and thought, well, I guess I could try doing a podcast. And, it's kind of morphed around a little bit as it's gone. But really, the summary of it, the podcast is really just I try to talk to smart people about Disney and theme parks. Like might be an Imagineer or a podcaster or an author, and just one-on-one interviews. It's really fun for me to learn more about behind the scenes stuff, especially about the parks, and then just to talk to interesting people. And done about 107 episodes now, I think, and really enjoying it and having a lot of fun doing it, just getting to talk with people that I never thought I would be able to talk about from, various areas of Disney, and then just people that love the parks. So it's been great.
Yeah, I love the diverse range of subjects that you have had on your show. Not just us, of course, but getting to hear from those, there's certainly higher profile Imagineers that you've talked to, but even those whose stories that listeners might not be as familiar with are absolutely worth kind of digging into the history of maybe that in-between era of where we are now and the people that had worked directly with Walt Disney. So we've enjoyed a lot of those. But today we get to have you here to kick off our summer cinema series, focusing on live action and literary classics. Last summer, we devoted 4 episodes between June and August to Ridley Pearson's Kingdom Keepers series, and we loved the idea of a small focused set of episodes, so we thought what better idea for this summer than to blend the classic literature and some of Disney classic films from Walt's early forays into live-action filmmaking. Later this summer, we'll dive down deep into 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea and play along with Pollyanna, but first up for us is an important first for the Walt Disney Company, Treasure Island. Before we get into that Disney history, Emily, do you care to unlock the treasures that lie in the history of this book?
Sure. Let's talk about Robert Louis Stevenson and his book Treasure Island. So Treasure Island is a British story and was published first in 1881. The story was originally serialized in the magazine Young Folks from October 1881 to January 1882 under the title The Sea Cook. The stories were published together as Treasure Island in book form in 1883, so pretty close together from magazine to book. Once it was published as a full novel, this is when the story really gained popularity around the United Kingdom. Stevenson said about the idea of the story, quote, "It was to be a story for boys, no need of psychology or fine writing," end quote. Sea stories were popular dating back to Daniel Defoe's Robinson Crusoe in 1719, but in the 19th century, the deserted island romance featuring shipwrecks, pirates, and treasure were increasingly popular. And Treasure Island was published at the climax of this genre's popularity, and that contributed to its success. Stevenson was inspired by several sea novels published in the 18th and 19th centuries, and he admitted in an 1884 letter to his close friend, Sidney Colvin, who is an English curator, literary and art critic. And that letter says, quote, "Treasure Island came out of Kingsley's At Last, where I got the dead man's chest, and that was the seed. And out of great Captain Johnson's History of the Notorious Pirates." He also admits that he took the idea of Captain Flint's pointing skeleton, which we'll talk about, from Poe's The Gold Bug, and he constructed Billy Bones' history from the pages of Washington Irving, one of his favorite writers. So, large compilation of lots of pirate sea-themed novels that ultimately led to Treasure Island. But Stevenson was destined to write adventure novels since he led quite an adventurous life himself. After graduating from law school, which he never used his degree, he never stopped traveling and had been all over Europe, the United States, and the South Pacific. However, he was always a sickly man since a childhood case of tuberculosis. It was between his travels and bouts of illness that he wrote many of his literary works. He wrote 13 novels, 6 collections of short stories, 1 play, several travel journals, poetry, and nonfiction essays. Other than Treasure Island, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is probably the most recognizable by title of his works, probably to most of our listeners. In the end, an illness caused his family to cut short their travels, and they ended up settling in Samoa in the South Pacific. There, Stevenson died of a brain hemorrhage in 1894 at the age of 44. So a rather short life for this author, but he has a lot of literary works, and we can only imagine what other adventures we would have had if he had a longer life.
Thanks so much for that history.
Yeah, so let's talk about the book. To you guys, prior to this episode, has anyone read the book before? How familiar are we with Treasure Island prior to this? Dan, why don't we start with you, since you're our guest?
So I think I read Treasure Island as a kid, but I have no memory of it. So it might have been an abridged version, like one of those kids' books or picture books. But I'm familiar with it, I think, mostly due to I saw the Disney movie as a kid, like on the Disney Channel, or maybe my parents, we watched a tape that they had rented or something. And of course from Muppet Treasure Island, which is a little sad. So I know the story very well. Plus, I think the story has drifted on now to so many other things that we'll talk about, not even just straight remakes, where everything felt very familiar, even though I'm not sure I've read the book cover to cover, at least definitely not as an adult. Maybe at some point when I was really young.
Okay, cool. I've definitely never read this, but I'm surprised. I guess it's one of those, as you're kind of saying, like, you know, you're aware of it as a kid. It has this status of lore. There's certainly been Disney adaptations, non-Disney adaptations. I feel like it might have been referenced in The Page Master, which is not Disney, but a big part of my childhood. But no, I had never read it, so I was excited. This has definitely been on our list of books to tackle, probably since when we started creating the show. We made a long list, and we're still working our way through it. What about you, Emily?
Yeah, I was really excited to do this episode because I think I was one that was like, we have to do Treasure Island. I read it in high school. I've mentioned on this podcast before that I had a serious time in my life where I only read classics and only shopped in the Barnes & Noble classics section of the fiction bookshelves. So I have read it before, but I was surprised how little I didn't remember. I remembered a lot of the standoff when they're on the island, but a lot of the other things, like the ending, I did not recall. So it didn't stick with me as much since over the last 5 years, probably since last time I read it 5 or 7 years ago. Same. Muppet Treasure Island is probably my intro to the idea of what is Treasure Island. I was a big Muppet watcher as a kid and still am. So, and like you said too, Dan, just a lot of the themes, I think just pirate lore that has just been populated so much through books. I mean, even Stevenson, like I said in the history, he borrowed a lot from other authors. So a lot of these ideas, I think, have just been popularized for centuries of what a pirate is and what they do.
Yeah, I feel like this is considered sometimes the epitome of the adventure genre. What about this story and its plot stood out to you in those adventurous moments?
Yeah, to me, I feel like a lot of it felt so familiar. And I think it's kind of this classic boy's adventure. Like basically, you have this boy who, of varying ages and different versions, but who basically, in this version, he has a dad who dies and then a mom, but we barely see them. They almost seem like it seems to me like a kid would see this story and be like, oh, I want to go off on a pirate ship and fight pirates and find treasure and, people die. And I mean, I don't know if the people die is something kids really want to hear, but just the idea that it's like dangerous and you're on the high seas and all that. I mean, I'm of course talking about the high points of the book, which is rather drawn out a bit, but I will say that I think what makes it adventurous is just all those elements. It really feels like kind of a 10, 12, 13-year-old boys kind of like when they're thinking about, wow, I'm kind of bored. I'm in school or I'm at home or I'm in the suburbs. I want to go on this big adventure. And that book kind of now still kind of fulfills that, but especially may have done that when it came out in the 1880s.
Yeah, it was more violent than I expected.
It is very violent. Like even Jim kills a man.
Yeah, I read it.
How old is Jim in this again?
That's what I wasn't sure, because in my mind, I picture Bobby Driscoll, who's probably like 11, but I couldn't decide as I was reading it. I was like, is he later in his teens? What do you guys think?
I was thinking young too, because I think I'm used to that, to Bobby Driscoll, like you said. And also just, it's hard to know because you kind of go through it and there's just so much about people, shooting each other, and the shootouts get described in extreme detail during the book. So you kind of do wonder, like, because Bobby Driscoll seems like a young 11 too. Like he looks like he could be 10 or 9 almost, the way that he's so wide-eyed and everything. So I'm with you. I think he's on the young side, not like Treasure Planet.
Right, because he's about 16 there. Okay, so Bobby Driscoll was actually 13, but he looks like a baby face. I just looked at IMDb.
I mean, this is kind of drifting into talking about the film, but I think that also is just the persona of child actors in the 50s. Mm-hmm. They have that very eager, oh, gee, Mr. Silver, can I really? Like that very eagerness that just makes them sound younger. Right, that Leave It to Beaver sound that I think just automatically makes them seem younger.
That's fair.
And again, just our reference and context of what an 11 and 12-year-old is just vastly different than 1950 and vastly different than 1881.
Yeah, they matured real fast then, I guess.
Yeah, history is interesting. Children were very mature way, way, way long ago, and then we let them be children. So it's kind of like a backwards. We now understand childhood. But for me, what makes this adventurous is, I think, not just, the excitement and violence, but just kind of that unknown, like something about the ocean and getting on a ship and not knowing where you're going is just kind of adventurous in a way. It takes a lot of twists. The story does take some twists and turns of characters you're not flip-flopping on whose side they're on, and internal motivations that are kind of a mystery to you. Maybe not to us because we know we have some background into Treasure Island, but like a first-time reader, 1880s, or someone who truly has never heard of Treasure Island at all, imagine them reading this for the first time and not knowing Long John Silver's motivations. That could be very intriguing and adventurous.
Yeah, I will say the story started out a bit slow for me, but like once we were on the ship, and the narrative started moving forward. I'd say for the most part, I was hooked into that adventure. There were some other parts where it lulled, but getting to the island is a big step for them, and then just trying to find that treasure of Treasure Island.
Yeah, I wondered about that too, because I'm curious, because for me, I didn't know if it was because I was reading it over a fairly short period of time and reading big chunks, but there were stretches where I was kind of not as engaged. And I don't know, again, if it's just, I'm trying to picture me as a 12-year-old reading this or something, but there were parts where I was kind of like, all right, let's, but I don't know if that's because I know the story. So I was kind of like anticipating, like, oh, now we're going to get to the part where they're in the stockade, or now we're going to meet Ben Gunn or Benjamina, or something. So I was like,
Benjamina.
Yes.
I love her. Yes.
So I don't know if that worked for you, but for me, yeah, there were times where I thought, I don't want to turn this into me just criticizing the book, but I felt like yeah, could this be a little shorter? Could this be a novella? I don't know if there's enough there, but it's adventurous. And once it gets to the high points, those are cool. But I wonder again if it's the 90-minute movie that's throwing me off.
Well, and I think when we get to the movie, we'll kind of get to plussing, but the movies definitely streamline it. But I was interested when Emily was going over the history, the fact that this was serialized first. I guess if you're getting it in smaller chunks, like you're kind of like waiting for the next issue to come out almost. Like maybe that helped it.
Yeah, I was thinking the same. A lot of English, particularly children's literature in the 19th and 18th centuries was serialized in magazines because books are expensive. So it's easier to get your stuff published in a newspaper that more people can read and afford, and then make that investment into turning it into a book. So I think that could be just typical of a serialized genre. But also I think that could just be typical of 19th century writing. Because I've read a lot of classics and I have the same issue in places where I'm like, this is a lot of description that does nothing for the plot.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think of something like Moby Dick or something, which is kind of an extreme example
even
where
longer.
It goes off to the whales and everything. And it raises an interesting point too, because you think about this book and it's kind of chugging along and you're going with Jim's story, and then Stevenson's kind of like, wait a minute, we're going to go over here. And the whole time you've kind of been, it's almost like you're following Jim and you know what he knows and you don't know everything else. And then the story switches and does something where then the doctor takes some chapters. And I wonder what you think about that, because it's quite a change and it does fill in the gaps, but did we need to know that? I guess that's the big question.
I think it might have been necessary for the book's sake, because for a couple of reasons. For the plot, because so much happens, Jim is taken ashore before the rest of the crew. We have to know how they lose the Hispaniola. And I guess he could have taken a route where when Jim meets back up with them in the hut house in the stockade, like he could have heard them tell that story. But I think it is more adventurous when you hear of Captain Smollett and the doctor and their small loyal band of people kind of have to fight to get off the ship. That's a little bit more adventurous than them telling the story to Jim later. So I think that was the device there, was to know what happened when Jim is absent from the Hispaniola. I think that could have also been cool for the serialized version. Again, thinking on that history, that could be exciting for a reader to be like, oh, new person, let's hear from so-and-so. So that could have been interesting. Maybe he was getting feedback from readers as it was coming through that some people were like, I want to hear from so-and-so, and he took a stab at it. I don't know. But I think the main motivation was just to know what happened on the Hispaniola when Jim's absent.
It felt very abrupt to me, though. So that would be my criticism of it. Like, I was not prepared for it. I guess I was like, oh, and we're shifting point of view. So I was actually reading along to this book. So I had the ebook in my hand, but I also listened to an audiobook as I read it. And so the voice changed for me. And I guess that's what really caught my attention. I was like, oh, we're shifting. Okay, it's a different person, or a different voice that this narrator was putting on.
It's interesting because I didn't think about the serial part too, because you can almost think of this as like a TV show where you have like a lead character, and then all of a sudden for an episode they're like, we're just going to focus on this side character. So maybe it's almost like, and I have no idea, the one issue, like you said, Emily, was just the doctor. And so it's almost like, like we're a TV show, there's a big moment, and then they cut back to 48 hours ago, and like, oh, here's what happened, and actually that person you thought was dead isn't really dead, or whatever, some sort of other episode. So maybe it's something like that, because it's interesting, especially just given, this isn't Game of Thrones. It's a book that's told in a certain way from the 19th century and now kind of does an interesting shift.
Yeah, I'm glad it wasn't too many chapters. I think it was only 3. So while it's abrupt, I was happy to get back to Jim. It felt more complete coming from his voice. But I do think that it was better to learn about Hispaniola being taken over that way than I think it was more, I guess, like we said, more adventurous, fitting of the genre to watch that action go down. But I agree, it was a change. It was different. But talking about complexity, and talking about the Doctor is one character. He's a big character, but pretty much other than Jim, Long John Silver is probably the most well-known character, not only in literature, but just even on TV or in pirate lore in general. He's really complex. So curious, do you guys see him more as a protagonist or an antagonist in this story?
I feel like we often think about protagonist and antagonist as the villain of the story or the hero. And I kind of got in like a bit of a deep discussion with Doug about this as we were watching all 3 movies across the weekend. Doug did not read the book, but he was along for the film journey that we were having. And he kind of asked me that. He's like, well, I think I brought up that this was a question and I was struggling with it. And he's the one who said, well, the protagonist is whose journey you're following. So I think we're absolutely following Jim's story, as we've kind of hinted here. Aside from those 3 Doctor chapters, Jim is our narrator. It's really his journey, and Long John Silver is kind of a foil to that. But I don't know, like, if I'd ultimately call him the villain, because you do see kind of a friendship or kinship between the two. What do you guys think?
Yeah, that's a tricky question. I think I'm with you on the journey being Jim's, not Long John's, because again, we're seeing him like he's working behind the scenes and obviously is playing a big role in the plot and what's happening. But I think what makes it complex, kind of like what Emily got at first, is the fact that Long John Silver starts out, his whole goal is, I want that treasure. I don't care if the guys I come with get killed or not, or I kill them or anything. I'm getting this treasure because, I need it. And it's mine from, I don't need to describe the whole plot to everyone. But basically, the tricky part is because he gets a personal connection with Jim. And you see this in every version, where even when you think Long John's kind of more of a jerk in one version, it's like, nope. He kind of sees, I don't know if it's Jim's goodness or kind of his excitement, but all of that kind of makes him sometimes act against his own interests. So he's not really a straight up villain, because typically a villain is someone who, no matter what, he does betray Jim some, but he's not going to stand up to his own men and possibly hurt himself to do it. And he does that. So I think he kind of falls into that. He's not a good person if you get into villains being bad or good. But in terms of totally going against him, he's kind of his own guy that sort of is both. I don't know. Well, it's tricky.
I find it interesting that Emily brought up in the history, the original title was The Sea Cook. So in that regard, like, Long John was the focus there. But again, going back to like coming through Jim's point of view. Emily, what do you take from that, given your research on it?
I kind of am torn. Like you said, if the original title was The Sea Cook, and we hear about Long John Silver well before we know his name, Billy Bones from the beginning, beware of the one-legged man. So you always have this idea of who this person is. He is the driver of the plot, even though we are seeing the story through Jim. So, and like you said, Dan, not to go into the plot, but the whole reason Billy Bones with the map and whatever, Long John Silver has a hand in all of that. So in a way, he's kind of a protagonist, because if Long John Silver wasn't a character, Flint's map and the whole treasure hunt probably wouldn't be happening at all.
I think he's also kind of the crux for some of the themes or morals in this story. I see it as a cautionary tale about greed, but I'd love to know what you both picked up from it.
It's interesting to me because in one sense it is, because you see these pirates who want to do anything for the gold and everything and kind of get fooled and end up dying. But Jim and the captain and the squire also want the gold. And so they're not terrible people, and yet they're seeking it too. So while it's a cautionary tale about greed from certain pirates, I feel like also there's a part of the story that's like, yeah, we're going to go. We're good people, but we still want the money too. I don't know. I find it hard to figure out the theme when it's more like, be a good person and you'll get rewarded with treasure. I don't know.
I think that's what it is, though, because the pirates do it more, I guess, more greedily, where they're willing to kill and connive and betray their own crew, whereas the other, quote, the good crew members, Jim's party, who's that, Trelawney, Livesey, Jim, they, I guess they're just not. I don't know. I mean, they only defend themselves with violence. They don't invoke violence. They, there's numerous times where they bring in religion, that they are religious and Christian, and therefore they will be rewarded because they went about getting the treasure the right way. I hope that makes sense.
No, I get what you're
like,
saying.
They caution the pirates or their crew before you find out they're pirates, like, alcohol isn't good for you. You shouldn't excessively drink. When they tear the page from the Bible for the black spot, that's a really big to-do. There was a point where I guess it was Jim versus Hands. What's his name? Hands? Isaiah Hands?
Israel Hands. Yeah.
Israel Hands. That's it. Where Jim's like asking him, like, don't you care about your soul? And, doing the right thing. I think it's Jim is saying that to Israel Hands. I don't know if he might have been saying that to Silver. I don't remember. But like there is some they invoke a religion, not a ton. Definitely could have been heavier on it given the time period it was written. But they do use it as kind of separating the good crew from the pirates.
Well, if you think about the metaphor, not necessarily in this book, but something that people refer to as like a moral compass, it's almost like the people with more morals are those that were truly led to the treasure, not deceived by it.
Yeah, so I see the greed portion where greed kind of blinds you to doing poor things, whereas those who righteously seek their goals will be rewarded, I guess. You bring up a good point there, Dan, of it's a tough moral to see very clearly.
Sure. Yeah. I think it's a tricky one just because I don't want to oversell the complexity of the story because, again, like we talked about with the adventure genre, it's still pretty straightforward, but I feel like there's a few layers where it's not like one of those stories where nobody gets the treasure. It just ends up in the ocean or something because everyone was too greedy, which there are plenty of stories like that too, where it's like no one deserves it, or it goes to some, if it just went to Ben Gunn and no one else got it or something like that, who was the random person. So I think that's a big part of it.
Long John Silver even gets away with treasure at the end. When he escapes, he takes a bucket with him. So, yeah, it is a little... I think you could make a better argument, maybe moral... I don't know if it's a moral, but calling this a coming-of-age story. Jim starts out pretty young and naive, and by the end of this, he's fought pirates, saved his friends. He's had quite a growing-up adventure. Maybe it's a more fitting coming of age story.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think so. So, it seems like for me that most of us are invested in certain characters, but I'm curious for the two of you, like, what was your favorite thing about the story or your favorite characters maybe?
Mine was absolutely Long John Silver. I think just because, as we referred to earlier, he's such a complex character, you really don't know which way he's going to swing sometimes in these moments of confrontation. As far as parts within the story outside of those characters, I definitely have a least favorite part. And that is when Jim takes the dinghy boat that Ben Gunn had constructed, and he's trying to catch up with the Hispaniola shift because it's adrift and he's kind of fighting against the waves. I just felt like we got so much detail about how he's trying to maneuver the craft and catch up with the ship. I'm like, just get on the boat.
I agree that was my least favorite part as well. My favorite is when they find the treasure. It's kind of crazy that the actual treasure hunting part doesn't happen until the last sixth of the book in part 6. But I liked the following of the map and that crux where Long John Silver does very clearly betray his crewmates that he was hunting the treasure with. I think we just see I think that final shift was really good. I enjoyed that. Favorite character-wise for me, I don't know. I guess Long John, no one really stuck with me too much for me to say I have like a super favorite character. I like Jim, but yeah, I don't know. I don't know if any one character really stuck out to me.
What about you, Dan?
Yeah, Jim's a little boring to me, actually.
You want to like Jim, but ugh.
And it's no better. The movies, we'll get to that. But I just kind of like, Jim just kind of leads us along the way. But I'm like, yeah, okay, Jim. But really, yeah, it seems kind of obvious for me to just say, oh, it's Long John Silver is the best character. But that's because Captain Smollett and the Squire and the Doctor are all kind of boring. They're fine. Captain Smollett, he's by the rules. He tells it like it is, and he's very serious. And Ben Gunn gets kind of fun, but he's not as the book. He's the movie we'll get to. But I think that I really enjoyed, again, like I think you brought it up too, that when Long John really, like when he gets the black spot and the way he kind of gets himself out of that and some of the flip arounds there, what I found, it's weird to say because the first part of the book is so slow, but when they started like having the shootout, and there was a point where I was like, wait a second, I'm not really paying attention to who got shot again. Wait, what? Who's that guy? I don't like all the different names. Like there's, Red Ruth, and then there's like a Tom, and there's all these different names, and I'm just kind of like,
it sounds like a 1940s gangster film.
Yeah, I'm just like, I don't care that much. Also, too, I mentioned this in the beginning, but and again, this is a boys' story. This is boys. They're going to be pirates and everything, but there are basically no female characters in the entire book. And I know it's 1882. So again, it kind of gets to the idea of how does it work for now? Because it stood out to me in each version for the most part, just how they were all dudes. And it's definitely a boy's story, which, I was once a 13-year-old boy, so that's okay. But I found that parts of it just were a little too, like you said, even the part about the boat, it's a little too much into all the little weeds of the story that I'm like, yeah, I don't need that. Let's go. And I think part of it is just Stevenson really wants to write to that boy who's into all that stuff.
Yeah, and I think you guys just sold me more on Silver. Like after finishing the book, no one really stuck with me, but that scene you were talking about with the black spot and how Silver really can talk his way in and out of anything. They were ready to kill him, and then they were like, no way, you have to be our captain. They call him Barbecue. I was not ready for, but Barbecue forever. I was like, okay, I guess because he's a cook. So yeah, I would say I think he's portrayed much better in the films than he is in his own book. I think you get a lot more of that cleverness. We'll get there, but I think he sticks with me more from the movies than he does with me from the book.
Maybe I just liked Silver best because, as I said, I was listening to an audiobook and the guy always did a pirate voice when he read him, so it was just more enjoyable for me that way. I was like, oh, we got some Silver dialogue. This guy committed, so that was fun.
Part of me wonders how much more I plan to take your approach for our next episode, 20,000 Leagues. But how much more maybe I struggled a little bit with the dialogue. Maybe it's 19th century, 18th century English, or just what Stevenson imagines as pirate jargon that we also have all adopted around the world as being pirate jargon, that I had to read the dialogue sometimes 2 or 3 times to get what they were saying. So I wonder if having someone read it aloud to me, that I would have understood it more outright versus trying to figure it out in my own head. Anyone else struggle with the dialogue? Just me?
No, that's why I had to do it.
Oh yeah, I did too. And maybe if I had read it in my head in a pirate voice, it would have worked better. But I was also sometimes reading it like 11 at night and stuff. That's not really the best time to try and figure out all the dialogue. So I'm totally with you, Emily. I was right there.
Yeah, Courtney, I'm definitely going to adopt your listen and read along method for our next book.
It helped me focus.
So before we go into Disney, why do you think this story is still popular and relevant today? It was written in 1881 to 1883, and Walt Disney turned it into a movie in 1950. So and we've seen so many reiterations of it. So why do you guys think it's still popular and relevant? Dan, we're going to start with you.
I think parts of it are. I think the basic components are relevant and popular. Part of it because of the Pirates of the Caribbean movies, actually, where you could see a lot of connections. But just the idea of this adventure story where you have someone who's living an orphan, well, in certain versions, I jumped ahead of it, but someone who doesn't seem to have an exciting life, who then gets to go on an adventure with good guys and bad guys and shooting and, fun and the high seas and the whole deal. All that stuff is relevant. I think the book itself and the way it's written is not that relevant. I doubt that as many people read it today. I mean, obviously, I think some people probably, as a focus on the classics, will go back and read it. But I don't think the book itself is that much. But I think those components of like the classic genre story hold up pretty well.
I agree with that, and I think it's also the character of Long John Silver that has staying power, that he is a dynamic character of that inner villainous but grappling with morality. I think that's a theme, and having good complex characters that you can then put on screen or write about, I think that sticks as well, of just having good character.
Yeah, I feel Dan raised a good counterpoint of maybe not necessarily the book, but the overall story and its themes, and that's what lives on in cinema today. So maybe it's that we have these different versions of the films, and that's what persists. So let's swim on over to some of the Disney history as it relates to this classic and get into the film a bit. There's a few reasons we picked this film to kick off our summer series. First of all, it's celebrating a milestone birthday very soon. The film was released July 19th, 1950, which means it'll be 70 years old in just a few weeks at the time of our recording. Second, in addition to being our first live-action topic in this series, it was also Disney's first live-action feature-length film without any animation. Previous films like Song of the South or The Reluctant Dragon, were primarily live action, but they did feature animated sequences, which is, the feature that built the Disney company, like Snow White. That's really what they were known for. But this is where they just we're going all in on live action. And this all sort of came about as a result of World War II. We've talked about the direct impacts of World War II on the studio at the time of the war in previous episodes, but Walt and Roy continued to feel those impacts post-war, primarily in their international markets. As always, I love to dive into my Disney A to Z collection, and that book does a great job of explaining this, so I'm going to quote from there. Quote, "The Disney company had blocked funds in England after the war, money that the Disney films had earned in that country, but they could not be exported due to currency regulations. Walt Disney decided that he could use that money to make some films in England, but since he could not find trained animators there to produce his usual fare, he decided to turn to live action instead. Over the next few years, 4 live-action films would be made in England," end quote. So, Emily, based on your history about the text, it makes sense to me that this would be their first live-action film. Stevenson's quote about it being a story for boys leads me to believe it might have been one that Walt loved reading as a child. The British setting of the book lends itself to this filming location. In fact, all of the actors in the film were English except for Bobby Driscoll, who plays the lead, Jim Hawkins. Bobby was one of the early child stars of the Disney company, starring in Song of the South, Melody Time, and So Dear to My Heart prior to this film, and then he voiced Peter Pan not long after, so definitely a strong history with the Walt Disney Company. In a move somewhat opposite to the text publication as a serial merged into a book, this film was one of the first Disney movies to be shown on television, just 5 years after its release. The film aired in January 1955 as part of the Magical World of Disney. However, it aired in 2 one-hour installments, each a week apart, rather than as a full film. Since then, the film has been released on VHS, DVD, and now has a home on Disney+. Speaking of Disney+, I was able to do a triple feature over the weekend with Muppet Treasure Island and Treasure Planet, which were released by Disney in 1996 and 2002, respectively. Our main focus today is that Disney live-action feature as part of this Summer Cinema Classics series, but I feel like they're briefly worth mentioning because I'm sure we'll get into our love and feelings for those too.
Yeah, I don't think we can leave out the Muppets.
No, gosh.
We've all mentioned them already by this point that we have to talk about the Muppets.
So let's focus on Treasure Island, the original film, first before we get into those. Just focusing on this original film, do you think it upholds the integrity of Stevenson's book? Emily, why don't you go first?
I absolutely think so. It's the most true adaptation, given set, different characters, and also it hits some of the smaller scenes as well, including our least favorite scene, though it speeds it up. So I think it does hold the original story. We have Jim, an innocent character who interacts with pretty much everyone that's named in the book. We see Billy Bones. We even see Black Dog, who really plays no big role in this movie whatsoever, other than delivering the black spot. But they made sure that we saw that, and Long John Silver have his people run after him. So I think that Disney really took even hold of some of the smaller details that don't really matter in the overall plot and had them in there, just to have that integrity, I guess. It's a very true retelling, except for 2 instances, which I will talk about later. Dan, what did you think?
Yeah, I thought it was pretty good. I mean, I don't mean to keep picking on Bobby Driscoll. I think Jim is, again, kind of boring, but and I I'm kind of talking more about what I think about it, not as much the integrity. I think the movie itself makes the book seem better because of Robert Newton, who's just awesome as Long John Silver. And of course, immediately he's bad. There is no question. Like we talked about earlier, how he's kind of mysterious in the book about what his intentions are. Here he like looks at the camera, like, oh, that guy's a villain. Yeah. But I think though he is so perfect. I mean, yes, it's a bit over the top, but in a great way. And I think too, it's only like 95 minutes or something, the story. So what they do is they kind of boil it down to the essentials. Like you spend a little time at Jim's house, bam, you're on the ship. They jump through a lot of the parts that are really slow in the book. So I feel like they do a good job of kind of cutting things out while surprisingly still making it a pretty dark story. and still keeping in a lot of the kind of grimmer parts of it. It really doesn't pull back too far, which surprised me a bit.
It hits all the right beats. I will say, I've mentioned listening to that audiobook. It was supposed to be about 7 hours of content. I put it on 2x speed because I read very fast, so I felt like my eyes needed to keep up with the audio. So I listened to it in 3.5 hours. The movie cuts that even further at 90 minutes, but it hits all of the main plot points. As you said, it kind of speeds us along in a way that I appreciated, but still enjoyed. So I think the integrity is absolutely there with the characters, and nothing felt missing. Like if it was omitted, it was probably to save time, which made sense.
Yeah, pretty much the plot follows through all the way with like even the correct characters of who initiates something, or like getting the map. Or I really like that they kept the piece in the beginning with Trelawney and Dr. Livesey, where Livesey's like, I'm more afraid of you running your mouth. And so I did appreciate that, even though those characters, they're not major, they were very true to the book on what their personalities were, that I feel like you didn't see a big change. Whereas those are the characters in Muppet Treasure Island and Treasure Planet that get changed the most. So in those ways, I think the book is really, or the film keeps a lot of the integrity of the original story because it's very true to the characters.
What would you say were some of the major differences, though? Because we kind of hinted at that. For me, what stood out was like his parents weren't in it. Because his dad dies in the beginning of the book, which is very much a Disney trope, but they're like, nope, he's already dead. We're just gonna skip that whole chapter.
They reference the mom for like a second, but she doesn't even make an appearance, which even pushes to another level. But yeah, I was trying to think about differences. A lot of the things that are cut, I mean, I think they simplify a bit. They don't have as much with the big shootout. Like I think there aren't as many steps to like, like they kind of simplify it where it's like, okay, now there's gonna be a thing on the boat. Jim jumps in the water. Before you know it, they're in the stockade, and then he's back. Like all of that is condensed, but I feel like that might be a plus because it essentially just cuts out the parts that I found to be a little tedious, where I'm like, okay, there's 20 pirates. I don't need to know how every single one dies. Like in the book, where here I feel like we get the idea. They throw away a line or something. One thing I noticed too is that for a movie in 1950 for kids, is that there are 2 shots of people getting shot in the head. And then there's another shot where you see very blatantly Long John Silver getting Mr. Arrow drunk and having him die. And I'm like, this is a kids movie from 1950. It's pretty tough for that,
This came up in my research. Obviously the PG rating and stuff comes later in the 80s, I believe. But if you look at it on Disney Plus, it is rated PG. But when it aired on television, at least in the 70s or the 60s, I found an instance that they did edit out some of that violence so that it would have a G rating. So I meant to mention that when we were talking about the integrity. I remember I read the book first before I treated myself to any of the movies. I was going to get this done. And I was like, oh, wow, this is more violent than I expected. Is Disney going to touch on that? And they don't really hold back.
Yeah, the only thing maybe with the violence is you just don't see blood.
Yeah.
Until like after the fact. Like you saw Smollett get shot, but it's not until he's in the house and his jacket's off that you see like a red spot on his shirt. Or even with Jim when he's stabbed in the shoulder or nicked with the knife, you don't see it until the next scene when he's already removed the dagger and is seeing the doctor to be treated. Then do you see blood? So that kind of was shied away, but overall, yeah, the action is there. The major differences for me was the ending. Long John Silver escapes well before they all get on the Hispaniola, because in the book he like sticks with them pretty much until they are out to sea and he can get on a ship and take some treasure, and then he escapes. So I think the film was a little more dynamic in a way that Silver makes off with all the treasure. And that was the other big difference for me, was there's not as much treasure in the movie as there was in the book. It took them 3 days to load all of the treasure onto the Hispaniola, and here Long John Silver's getting away with all the treasure in his little boat, and it was like one chest.
Yeah, that wasn't entirely clear to me that he had all of it. That's something I think I missed, because I watched it and I was like, oh, he's got a chest. Good. Now they have the rest. But I think I was thinking of it in terms of the book, where, they at the end they're like, here's what happened with each character and what they did with the money. And I'm like, okay, great. But yeah, I think that another thing that I think I'd love to talk about the pluses that made the story better. I'm going to start by mentioning one that I think could pass it to Courtney. I think Ben Gunn is really hilarious in the movie, just because he's so over the top and so funny. Where I read him in the book, but I didn't really read him as being that silly. I mean, that the actor who plays him, just kind of like with Long John Silver, the same way. The actor just totally goes for it. He's only in a couple scenes. His name is Jeffrey Wilkinson, but I think Ben Gunn is great and is better in the movie and makes a lot of his little part. But Courtney, what were some of the pluses that you saw?
For me, it's the relationship between Long John Silver and Jim Hawkins. You get it in the book. We talked about the scene where he kind of goes to bat for Jim and he's protecting him, but I think it's this difference of like showing versus telling and what's communicated on screen through these actors and their emotions. I'm just gonna put spoiler alert out in the end, as we've referenced, where he's kind of getting away with all the treasure, and I questioned that too. I was like, wait, did I miss something when I was reading? I thought he only got a little bit of it, but in this scene Jim has the Long John Silver has the treasure in the boat. And it's kind of a confrontation between him and Jim Hawkins. And he wants him to like help him shove off of the island, like without the assist of the oar. So Jim would need to push the boat. And there's kind of a standoff between them. And then you just see these looks exchanged between the two of them. And that heart is there. And Jim does concede and kind of helps him escape with the treasure. I feel like in each of these films, because you're able to literally see the acting between the two characters, the father and son almost dynamic between them comes through very strong for me.
I agree. I think those would be my pluses. And as we mentioned, the speeding up of certain sections was definitely a plus. But Dan, you mentioned Long John Silver, Robert Newton, such a great on-screen character. What were your reactions when you watched this film and saw this character on screen?
Yeah, well, I remembered him being like, he's the memorable part. And actually they made a sequel that Disney did not make, but just with him. I think it was called Long John or Long John Silver. And so, and then he was in a TV show after that and stuff. So he really took that character and ran with it. But I've also read that like the idea of pirates saying arg and all that stuff was really not a thing before him. So it's almost like he created this character in the way that he created the character and the way he created pirates almost influenced every other pirate on TV or movies from then on. And you can see it. I mean, the looks on his face, some of them where he's like he's looking scary or it's that performance really I like the movie, but it works. If he was not good, the movie would fall apart. He carries the movie.
He is absolutely the heart of it. And I think he's a good pivot over to our other versions. Robert Newton absolutely nails it. And I think on the other end of the spectrum, still good, is Tim Curry as Long John Silver in Muppet Treasure Island. He's a bit more subdued, or like almost, it's like a different kind of camp.
He's more suave.
Yes, that's the word I'm looking for. But, oh, God, I absolutely love Tim Curry in Muppet Treasure Island. So feel free to share your thoughts on that one.
I mean, I just love Muppet Treasure Island and Tim Curry as well. So, like, I agree. Yeah, I think maybe because I am such a devout Muppet Treasure Island fan and watcher, and that was my intro, that I struggled a little bit with Robert Newton's portrayal, only because I personally saw the Tim Curry version so much. I didn't dislike Robert Newton. I think he was more gritty. He definitely was the biggest personality on the screen, which that film needed. But I usually pictured, I guess Tim Curry for me kind of has more of like the cunning piece of Long John Silver for me. that it's not an animated, this is how I turn people around. He's just more manipulative a little bit. For me, I'm a big Tim Curry fan, but that's also my bias of growing up on Muppet Treasure Island.
Yeah, I'm with you though, and that is a good point because, you know, like I mentioned, Robert Newton, when you see him, I'm like in 5 seconds, I'm like, that guy's evil. That guy's, I mean, not evil, but he's like when he sends them after Black Dog, it's like it's obvious that was the case. Where Tim Curry, you can more understand too. You see him and you're like, that's a pretty cool guy. He's a pretty cool Long John Silver. I can see why Jim wants to be friends, especially orphan Jim. It's another thing with Muppet Treasure Island where he's an orphan. He doesn't even have a mom or dad in the story. So orphan Jim sees this guy who's not as nutty, and you're like, wow, that kid wants him to be his dad. And Tim Curry kind of has enough. He's suave and he's kind of over the top. But it's funny to say all this. It's like I'm getting really deep about a Muppet movie where, you know, but it's like, but that's the same with Muppet Christmas Carol. It's the same deal where you have these human actors, both Michael Caine and Tim Curry, that really sell it and lift it up, because then it's like there's all the goof silliness, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a minute. But Tim Curry is so good. I mean, it's funny to think about that Tim Curry, I'm talking about this kind of serious thing, is also in the same movie with, you know, Fozzie talking to Mr. Bimbo, the character in his finger, which is also one of my favorite parts of the movie. So, Emily, how does this compare? Does that uphold the integrity of the original movie or story?
I think if we just focus on the idea of adventure and I think more on that theme of a coming of age story versus greed, yes. Because we do see Jim in both Muppet Treasure Island, Treasure Planet, we'll get to Treasure Planet, where he grows up from just, I want to go on an adventure, to realizing that people are complex human beings and relationships and betrayal versus loyalty. Like, I think in that aspect, it's all there.
I think what I like most about it is that it's a musical. I know that might not necessarily hold the integrity, but just the songs are so funny. So you have, again, the major plot points of it, but I can't get enough of the zany Muppet humor. So that's a plus to me, though it might not be the integrity.
Muppet self-awareness is always the best part.
Yes.
Just how self-aware they are. I think it's Rizzo that's like, what, are they going to get our theme? Where's the theme park or something like that? I forget what he said. He said something about a theme park and references Mickey Mouse, and it's absolutely hysterical.
It's Long John's parrot that's actually a crab.
Oh,
yeah, because they're confused by a talking parrot, and he kind of makes a wisecrack about that. But Rizzo does make the joke when Billy Bones dies in the beginning. He's like, this is a kid's movie. He can die. And then I'm hooked. I was like, okay, we're self-aware. I love this.
Yeah, I enjoy almost everything. I find everything's great except for the kid. Whenever he sings, I'm like, oh boy, you know, it's like, let's go back to the Muppets. And I feel like I'm just, every single time I just complain about the kid. But also too, I think there's little parts of it that I think are really funny, like you mentioned. Like I even think about Blind Pew, like going Billy Bones and talking to nothing, and just there's so many funny lines in it, and just the way that that it all works out, where it everything that's Muppet related is very funny to it. So, and I don't feel like the songs, you know, beyond the kid, the songs are all great too. So it's a thumbs up. And I think it's also kind of, I watched it with my daughters and they really enjoyed it. So it's a fun way for them to get to enjoy the story too, in a sillier way.
I think it's a great introduction, and I believe this was my first. It came out in 1996, and I remember my dad taking me to the movies to see it with him. So it was fun. This past weekend was Father's Day weekend, so he did watch this movie with me and Doug. Doug and I did the others on Friday and Sunday evening, but on Saturday afternoon he was staying here, and we got to revisit it together. So I'm glad that you shared that with your daughters as well. On the other end of the spectrum is Treasure Planet, at least in my opinion. I would love to hear yours. All views are my own and do not represent the Walt Disney Company.
I'm going to go last because I know I stand on a different side than you and Dan on this one.
All right, Team Dan and Courtney, let's go.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Oh, that one drags for me. I struggle through it. What's interesting is all three of them are about 95 minutes, give or take maybe a minute or two. And that one just feels long to me. I think it deserves more credit maybe than a lot of people, myself included, given. We'll get that perspective from Emily. It's a very unique take on the story, and I appreciate what they were trying to do, but for some reason I just cannot get into that movie.
Yeah, and for me too, I think part of it might be the situation where I read the book, I watched the Treasure Island live action, and then I watched this one right after all of those.
Treasure Island.
So I'm going to say that, yeah, I'm going to say up front that I'm like, oh, here we go again. But I think the animation looks cool. It's kind of the mix of 2D and 3D from that time. And I think some of the voice actors are very good. So I'm trying to start with the positives here. But, you've got Martin Short and Emma Thompson and David Hyde Pierce and tons of people that have great voices. Joseph Gordon-Levitt in it. But I found it to be, I've seen a lot of movies, like kids movies and stuff, and it did at times kind of fall into that, okay, action, things blowing up, things going, okay, go, go, go. And my brain was like, all right. So I felt like some of the ways they adapted it were cool. I didn't have a problem with them putting it in space, but I felt like when it kind of got rolling is where my brain started to drift. But I think, like I said, it might be just Treasure Island fatigue at this point, but it just seems kind of forgettable. But go ahead, Emily.
Emily, sell us on it.
I love Treasure Planet. It's one of my go-tos when I don't know if I want, like, when I'm not feeling princess film or musical, I go Atlantis or Treasure Planet. And I don't know, I just really like the film. I think this is the best characterization of Jim and Long John Silver. I like Jim older, and I like that we get more of a Jim backstory versus his parents own an inn and his dad died. I think this is the only film where you really root for Jim. He's not boring. You know he has a lot of struggles in his past. You get the mom. The mom is an actually prevalent character.
I will give it that.
And a driving force behind Jim's character growth. Or from his beginning. But I think you see the most character from Jim. I think the relationship between him and Long John Silver is so much better, probably due to the music montage of them doing things on the ship together, that you get more of their relationship on the ship versus just on the planet or the island. You see, I think, better their relationship grow. And I like that Jim he's more stubborn. He has more character. And I think that's how he and Long John Silver become closer. Is I like that they butt heads, and that's how Long John sees himself and Jim and why he starts to develop the soft spot. I think the relationship is just so much better, and Jim's growth is better in Treasure Planet versus the other adaptations.
You've made a good case, and I respect your argument. You might have sold me a little.
Jim is better here. Jim is not the bad part. So I will agree with you. This is not dull Jim. So that is correct.
And kind of a stretch here, maybe not. The three that we've primarily talked about, have a Treasure Island or a variation of it in the title. As we were pulling together our notes for this, Emily made a really good point about bringing up parts of the Caribbean. And I think initially I was kind of like, okay. But then as I was watching it and reading it, I absolutely started to see the links to the film and maybe a little bit of the attraction. I'd love to know what both of you have picked up on as well.
Yeah, I could see the connections. I mentioned this earlier, the idea of searching for a treasure and there being kind of characters that double cross each other. And you have even like, it's not the same, but in Pirates, you've got kind of the, it doesn't totally connect, but the bright-eyed in the first Pirates, Will, is kind of that way where he's a little like, oh, this is great. I mean, granted, he's trying to save his girlfriend, so it doesn't totally connect. There's actually women in this one, but So yeah, I see the connection in terms of the genre, and I do think though that Treasure Island did have an influence on Pirates of the Caribbean, and even on, especially on the attraction, I think, because like we talked about, even with Long John Silver and the way he talks, like I would hear Long John Silver talk, and I'm like, this reminds me a lot of Pirates of the Caribbean, the attraction. So I think that the attraction has connections because it's part of that through line that starts with books in the 1800s, but eventually with movies really picks up in the 50s, and then some other movies leading up to when Pirates came out in the 60s.
For me, you would not have Captain Jack Sparrow without Long John Silver. Like, he
absolutely
is an evolution of that character in the sense of he has a heart, he has soft spots for various characters, but he is very self-centered, he's conniving, he's cunning, he'll take the opportunity to double cross sometimes. So I see the extension there. Emily, what did you pick up on?
That one as well. I definitely see Jack Sparrow as that, like you said, the evolution of Long John Silver. But attraction wise, I really think maybe what just stood out to Imagineers or Walt Disney himself is just the, I guess, pirate culture. Like you said, how they talk, how they dress. They care about just having a good time and drinking ale. And they actually mentioned Tortuga. That just hit me. In the book, in the first like 2 pages or a couple pages, they say Tortuga somewhere. And I was like, oh my gosh. I was sad that we didn't get more of that. But like Tortuga's in there. The idea and the culture around the black spot and telling someone, you know, your imminent end is coming. So I think they play a lot on the culture, the pirate culture that was popularized through literature and film. But I think Pirates of the Caribbean as a film also draws on those same popular things as well. So to me, I would argue that this is if we call Treasure Island a genre, I would argue that this falls under the Treasure Island genre of films. I did want to ask you guys about the song, because when I was reading the book says yo ho ho, but I kept saying yo ho because of the attraction song versus the book song. Do you guys see any, I don't know, connection, or just why do you think pirate songs work? I don't know. I had this fascination of thinking about the attraction song versus the song in the book that's used over and over.
I think it's why pirate song works. I think it's just because they're very sing-along songs, the type you would sing if you were stuck on a boat and really bored for a long time and just drank rum and everything. But I definitely think there is, I didn't see it when I was reading it, but there's a connection there where both of them are just kind of like, you know, I don't know, I'm not going to sing the song. I don't want to do that to anybody. But they have that kind of really basic idea of something that you can imagine people working on a ship and being really bored, but trying to kind of be cohesive and have fun. They would sing some. And I think there's definitely a connection when Exitencio wrote the lyrics that probably had something in mind, or at least this type of song from the past.
Yeah, I'm not sure if what Robert Louis Stevenson pens is his own creation or just what you call like a sea shanty that people sing. I think of in elementary school, they taught us What Do You Do with a Drunken Sailor, which now in retrospect may not have been the most appropriate song for third graders to sing. But it's a good song. So I think you're right, Dan, that Exitencio is drawing, maybe not necessarily from Robert Louis Stevenson specifically, but that particular genre. So there's another through line for us. Dan, you found an interesting fact in your research for another bit of Disney history, particularly here at Walt Disney World.
Yeah, so I think I already knew this, but I wasn't sure exactly. I was thinking it was like just in the middle, but Discovery Island, not Discovery Island at the Animal Kingdom, Discovery Island, which is the island on Bay Lake, which I think I went to at some point as a kid, but the one that, you know, someone like broke into a little while back, and it looked like something out of the TV show Lost and was very weird. But it was an island where they had like a bird sanctuary, and you could visit it, well, I think into the 90s, if I remember. But it opened in 1974, but it actually opened and was called Treasure Island. Now, the interesting thing is by the time it opened at that point, it was already more of a bird sanctuary and not as much. But their original thought Again, I'm taking this from an article on allears.net. So if anyone listens and thinks this is incorrect, but it seems pretty reliable here. But the original thought is they were going to do a lot more with the pirate theme. They either thought about calling it Blackbeard's Island and eventually made it Treasure Island. And then there still was like a shipwrecked ship that was on Discovery Island. They were going to have more things like that. And they were going to have Ben Gunn's Ford and the Benbow Inn and all these kind of different things, which didn't end up being there. So it only was Treasure Island for 2 years, but that ship was there for a while, because I even remember on a YouTube channel, I watched this really weird music video by this band Pablo Cruz, if you can find it, from 1978, where they play a rock song in front of this pirate ship dressed like pirates on Discovery Island. So look that up. It's worth finding, I tell you. There's a lot of fun stuff there, but I think the main thing is Disney intended to really push the Treasure Island idea. They backed up, but it still took a few years before they changed the name.
Well, that music video certainly falls into, we like to leave our listeners with resources that tie to this subject. I think that is a perfect segue into that. We'll have to look that up ourselves. We always like to plug our friends over on Disorder, who are doing every Disney film in order. Their episode number 43 focuses on Treasure Planet, so they do a great job of getting into the history of that film. I know we focused more on Walt's original here. Certainly you can find those 3 films on Disney+. Emily, what else would you recommend?
So I had what Dan had mentioned before, the 1954 film Long John Silver, where Robert Newton reprises his role. It was not produced by Disney. It was actually produced by Treasure Island Pictures Party Limited. And the dominant shareholder and financier was Joseph Kaufman, and the directors, the writers, and Robert Newton himself were the main shareholders. But this was something interesting I found, which has a Pirates of the Caribbean connection. So the first, I will admit, I went to Wikipedia just to kind of see what the plot was. And this is the first line of the plot. The movie is set sometime after the events of Treasure Island. Long John Silver receives grave news from Dodd Perch of a massacre by Mendoza, who has also kidnapped Governor Strong's daughter Elizabeth for a ransom along with Jim Hawkins. Long John also learns of a second treasure cache on Treasure Island. The only clue to its location is a pirate medallion. Long John visits Governor Strong and his wife and proposes to deliver the ransom before they pursue Mendoza.
Oh my God, that's Curse of the Black Pearl. Kind of.
Exactly. So if you are a Pirates of the Caribbean fan, maybe revisit this. I found that super intriguing. And then also Disney did take their own stab sort of at their own sequel. It's called Return to Treasure Island. It is a 10-part 1986 Disney Channel sequel. So it was probably done in episodes, like probably 30 minutes, which is why it's so many parts. It was co-produced by Disney with HTV and stars Brian Blessing as Long John Silver.
Perfect. And Dan has found a link to the Pablo Cruz video, so we are putting that in the show notes, which will keep you tied over until our next episode in the series, about a month from now, towards the end of July. We will be reading 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea and watching the classic film in advance of that. So looking forward. I think that's pretty readily available. Right, Emily? We should be able to find that at the library. There's audio recordings.
Yeah, I found it on Hoopla. Therefore, it should be on Overdrive if you use online libraries. As libraries are opening up, like I know my local library, if you put books on hold, you can go pick them up at the library, or it's very readily available from any bookseller.
Perfect. Well, we look forward to having our listeners join us then. In the meantime, you're welcome to keep up with us on Twitter and Instagram at Book of the Mouse. Email us with comments or ideas to bookofthemouseclub@gmail.com. Be sure to leave us a review on iTunes so others can find our podcast and read and listen along with us. If you want to keep up with me, Courtney, I'm on Instagram at GreatGutsby and on Twitter at Courtney_Guth.
And you can follow me, Emily, on Instagram and Twitter at Emily_McD. And Dan, what is the best way for our listeners to keep up with you?
Sure. So my website is tomorrowsociety.com, where it's for the podcast. And also I've been doing some movie writing there, and I'm going to write about Treasure Island.
Yay!
It's going to come out in early July. So I took a lot of notes while I was watching it. Treasure Island, the 1950 film. You can follow me on Twitter at Tomorrow SOC, Instagram and Facebook are just at Tomorrow Society, and YouTube. You can go to tomorrowsociety.com/YouTube. I've been putting up old videos that my dad's home videos from trips in the 80s. Lately, it's been 1989 MGM Studios. So those have been really fun. They're home videos, but it's been really fun if you want to check that out.
That's fantastic.
I can't wait to check those out, and I'm really looking forward to reading your blog post after we've spent so much time discussing it here today. Very grateful for that. Since you're our guest of honor, we'll have you close us out with a quote.
Sure. So this is a quote from the movie Tomorrowland, and we'll give a little quick intro. Basically, this movie, some people love it, some people don't. Some people read different things into it and think it's saying that, you know, there's exceptional people and then there's unexceptional people and all that. I don't read it that way. I read it as a movie that's about, you know, not just about being positive, because that's kind of lame and cheesy, but really about, given our current situation in the world, what we can do to help out. So the quote is this: even the tiniest of actions can change the future. And I've been thinking about that a lot, given just what I can do to help and trying to think about just ways that I can, you know, help out wherever I can in kind of our crazy times. So that's really been sticking with me a lot, is kind of that movie, and what I get out of it, which I know can be different to different people, is really just, what can I do? We can be upset about things that are going on for sure, but what can I do to help? Whether it's donations or, you know, how I present myself, my podcast, whatever. What can I do to make a difference? That's what I've been thinking about.
I really like that quote. It's definitely an unexpected one, but I think it's so important for right now, as you said. So thank you so much for sharing it with us. And thank you again for joining.
Well, no problem. It was a lot of fun to do.
See you next time.
Thank you so much, Dan.
The Mouse Club has no affiliation with the Walt Disney Company. The views and opinions expressed by hosts and participants are theirs and theirs alone. They do not represent the organizations or companies they happen to work for.